Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, and welcome back to Finalysis, A Song of Ice and Fire today. I'm Callan, this is Matt.
Hey, winter is coming, everybody. How's it going?
Yeah, well, this is going to be a bit of a primer for the introduction to the fact that we're going to be covering some of the Song of Ice and Fire series in some upcoming videos. In a little bit of a different format than our usual, which Matt will go into in a second. But yeah, more content coming effectively. We're excited to dive into this one. Probably opening with how we got interested in and invested in the series. Do you want to start with that, Matt?
Yeah, sure. In my case, I was late to the party with this. Well, I hesitate to call it a franchise. It is a franchise now, but really, like we're treating this more as a look at the books purely.
Hmm.
Although our introduction, I think, mutually was through the show, which I'm sure everybody has heard of at this point. If you haven't, it
Where
took
are
the
you
world by
living?
storm. Yeah, yeah,
How have you avoided
yeah,
it? Is the question I want to
right.
ask.
Yeah, of course, like a Game of Thrones was like this amazing thing that captivated everybody until
Didn't.
until it didn't. Basically,
It
yeah,
was
you
such
had
a
four
drop off. It
seasons.
was such a drop off
Yeah,
from the end. I mean, everyone's talked about it to death, but just touching on the show itself for a second, to go from the absolute peak of pop culture heights, like you couldn't get more popular than Game of Thrones pretty much as a TV series for a long while, and to overnight just being, well, that was dead, that's gone forever,
yeah,
never going to be touched again or thought about. It was
and
quite a drop.
I think I was like I had loved it so much because it was so like just better than anything else in kind of its class of television. I mean, not to say that there aren't shows that are equally good, but
No,
just
of
in the
course, yeah, we're
genre,
going for a
like
golden age for
fantasy,
the last 10 years.
yeah, yeah. But like fantasy is such a crapshoot. Amazing stuff, and then like some of the, I don't even know, some of the lowest quality Z grade sort of like low budget scale stuff. And this started off quite low budget. I mean, relatively. Like when you
Mm,
think about like what season one of Game of Thrones was compared to like House of the Dragon season one, sort of night and day.
mm,
But yeah, it very much our introduction to it came through the show. And actually, we've begun our looks with the second book, and the second book is kind of really um the second season of the show, which correlates to the second book. That was so good. Like
mm.
that when it ended, I couldn't then wait for like the rest of it to happen. So where book two ends, where season two ends of a Game of Thrones, that's where I was like, I got to read the books. And so I started with, a Game of Thrones and carried on with Clash of Kings and A Storm of Swords. And then this also, because where most people know us through our Star Wars content over the years, this coincided with the decline of Star Wars. It was kind of like
It was pretty
one
much,
was like,
yeah. The
yeah,
peak of Game of Thrones was pretty much, yeah, in direct commentary to the valleys of Star Wars. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that before
yeah,
actually, but yeah, it was quite a nice hopping
yeah.
off point
So
into
I
that literary terms.
I sort of replaced my I never had a manic fandom of Star Wars, but I do have like a really just I get lost in the mythos, provided I like the sort of the foundation of the history and the strength of character enough. And Westeros, Planetos, as silly as it is to even say that, right? You would not think something as absurd,
As
as
rich
that
and
would have
textured as
the
this world could
yeah,
have that name.
yes. But the galaxy far, far away was one thing, just amazing, long thousands of years of history, many, many hundreds of characters that you can get invested in. This is much the same for me. And I won't say that anybody is wrong for having the same view of Tolkien at all. I mean, I've come to understand over the years just what a force Tolkien has been to not just the world of like literature really, but just sort of like expanding the kind of landscape of of fiction in a certain way. I do think he's often given a little bit just too much credit for some things, but when I stand back and look at what he did and when he did it,
Hmm.
it's hard not to give him his props. And George R.R. Martin would be the first to say that. He's said it many, many times. But he has also been kind of called over the years like the American Tolkien.
Mm. And I think
And I
quite
think that
deservedly,
that's an earned,
personally. You know,
yeah,
it
yeah,
is a bit of an overreach in just in the terms of where he sits. Like you said, the timing that Tolkien and of when
yeah,
Tolkien did what he did. You know,
yeah,
Martin is standing amongst a crowd as opposed to being that kind of isolated voice for the most part. But
yeah,
it's only a very minor overreach in my opinion. I think he deserves the
yeah,
title of the American Tolkien for his own
yeah.
era.
And certainly he's not like creating languages and
Mm.
entire mythologies, but I think he has. mythologies in the multiple, you could say Tolkien made. And I
Yeah.
would think that Martin wouldn't even claim to have done that, but I think he has created an entire mythology that is like consistent and just chock full of mysteries and like satisfying mysteries. Most of the things you don't know, you don't really want to know. Although you wouldn't mind if he like elaborated here or there on this particular this or that. You know, there's every and
Yeah, we've
and it's a
spoken in the
series.
past. We both love the
Yeah,
mystery element of Tolkien. I think it's not Tolkien,
yeah,
sorry, of Martin. It's one of the things that I
yeah.
think the fandom as a whole really latches onto, and has kind of kept the buzz going while we wait for the
It's
last two books. But I think you and I agree there are an occasional instances where it's like just give it a little bit of a morsel more here or there, Martin, because everything is a
yeah.
mystery. Everything is a
Everything.
mystery at the moment.
Everything has got like a kind of a you know, so the king did this, but some say really it was this. And
Mm.
that's all great. That's fantastic. It's not just two or three of those. It's two or three hundred of those over the course of like,
And they're all
thousands
latticed
of years.
together
Yeah.
and intermeshed in ways that
Yeah.
could be this way, could be that way. Who knows? This person thinks that. This person thinks that. The author is very much hinting at this, but has never actually confirmed it. So
Yes.
technically speaking, all of these things that are taken as pretty solid given, and with one particular instance in mind, there, it could all be just undone with a brush of a pen stroke. So there's a
Yeah.
lot riding on the final two books. The final two books' answers that we're obviously not going to get until they come out, if they come out.
Yeah. If they come out, there was we were never going to get out of this without we were never going to get out of this conversation without sort of, addressing that point. Um will he ever finish? Probably not. At this point, it's he. You also have to even define what finishing would look like. At this point, it's not just the last two books, which is already kind of looking like it'll never
Iffy.
happen. Yeah, he would like to write ideally something like I don't think he's given a particular number, but that's certainly in the realm of like maybe seven or more additional Dunk and Egg stories. He'd like to finish Fire and Blood with a second volume to close out his entire accounting of the sort of in-universe account of the Targaryen history, their reign in Westeros. So he's got his work cut out for him. In addition to the two massive tomes to close out the main series, he's got all those other things he wants to do. He's working on a stage play that I have recently heard is not just going to be in London, which is great because I would have flown to London just to see it. But it will be great if I don't have to do that. So which is set around Robert's Rebellion. There's all these spin-off shows, or what he likes to call successor shows to the amazing to the rather well, I may say amazing to the phenomenon
Amazing
that was the
until
original show. Yeah, it was the first four seasons were fantastic,
they
and
really
and
were.
and there was some great stuff after that even,
Mm.
but it fell so far down off a cliff. It's hard to even and that's been talked to death as well.
Yeah, of course. We don't need to
But
spend time on that.
I say all this to say I've made my peace with the fact he might never finish it. I don't care about that anymore. I've been reading the books for over a decade. I mean, almost probably around as long as we've been friends. It's
It
probably
would have been about
been
that because I
around the
remember at the
point.
early days. I mean, it was 1 or 2 years before the whole Disney stuff, cancelled most of
Yeah,
the
somewhere in
EU
there.
for Star Wars around that time. So, and I do remember that being the time you kind of picked up and really got into the
Yeah.
Song of Ice and Fire world. Because just touching on my experience with it a bit, not that it matters, but my I had made a concerted decision to wait until after the show had finished before I read the books because one, I knew
Oh,
obviously
that's
that we were
right. That's
waiting for
right. I
the
forgot about that. Yeah.
yeah, I knew obviously we were waiting for the final books to come out anyway, so I knew that would give me a bit more of a buffer. At the end, it turned out not enough of one, but in theory it would have helped to give me that extra book in the run at that point when it released. But also I knew just from experience and the literary trends, but also what people have been talking about with the books, that they would be better than the show. I mean, and it's worth saying that for the first few seasons, particularly the first two, I mean, we're starting on the chapter discussions for Clash of Kings, second book of the series,
Hmm.
because of what we love in it. But also, even if that wasn't true, the first book and the first series are pretty flawlessly,
Yeah.
connected. I mean, they did a fantastic job with adapting the first book and
Yeah,
onwards as well,
they
but
did.
particularly that first edition, to the point where you can almost watch the show and not have to read the book. That's an impressive
Yeah.
feat, and I think they deserve a lot of props for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was always basically just postponing reading the book so that I could come to it after the show and then not have anything not basically feel like the show wasn't living up to the book standard. Because
Yeah,
when you've already
yeah,
started on the show anyway, that's something that I think it can often happen. So where I usually read the books and then go for the shows after the fact, from the adaptations come second. This one I was doing in reverse by choice, and it was also
yeah,
very nice because once the drop off at the end of the show had happened as harshly as it did, it was nice to kind of soothe that burn a little bit by going into the books and thinking, oh yes, this is good, nice and textured, rich,
yeah.
and I mean, it's such a
If you
well handled series. He's a phenomenal author.
Yeah, if you don't know, I mean, because it's been a while since the original show ended anyway. House of the Dragon is, at the time that we're recording this, has had two seasons. The second of which kind of had some real stumbling points, but it's still a good show.
Mm.
But you know, I don't know how well this is penetrated, like the kind of just what
Zeitgeist.
people know by what people know by osmosis, really. But after a certain point, the books don't really bear any resemblance to what happened in the show. So that was the nice thing, is I was always able to tell you, like, once you actually finally did pick them up, after a point there's all this other stuff that just isn't going on. Like the sand snakes plot line was
Yeah, in particular,
particularly
everything with
terrible
Dawn.
in
Yeah,
in the book, you know. So everything with Dorn,
in the show, he means.
yeah, yeah, right. They cut everything to do with what's going on with an entire plot line about another, you know, sort of pretender to the throne that I won't say if you haven't read who that is, but that kind of only really hits the ground running in the fifth installment, and it's really, really good. So that was stuff that just was cut for kind of no reason, and you know, Martin was like, if you adapt those things, it'll give me more time to get this stuff out. And you know, he watched his readership expand until I think somebody once asked him, "You have 90 million readers." 90 million, which that might mean 90 million books sold, to be fair. That might not
Yes, yeah.
be 90 million readers. But that surely is because by that point the show was a thing. You know, so the show had helped sell this thing. And so when he's watching kind of his series be advertised on that level to the point where his readership is expanding to grow to that kind of size, and he's seeing the blueprint that they're going by is not the one he set out. I think it created like a real serious, you know, conflicted relationship he had with the whole thing. Um, and if you read his blog post entries over the years, I think he's really struggled with depression. He's getting on in years. A lot of his best friends, like really seriously, seriously good friends, not people he knew casually, people who had been his friends for something on the order of like decades, have passed on. You know, he's got to be wrestling with a great many things. So I am not bitter about whether or not the show will ever be finished. I try to be as empathetic as I can with him and his situation, and I'm just thankful that he gave us a work of fiction of this scale, because that, I think, more so than anything, is the thing that's inspired me with my own writing, is just showing how big you can go with your dynastic line's history, your
Mm.
the scale of your castles, like what can be considered magic and what not, and to have such low scale versions of it, and at the same time have some really, you know, true blue, fantastical, just kind of reality altering magic, you know, in the same chapters at some points. And to have people who don't really know what they're doing, people who know they're lying, people who have like an honest conviction but are using smoke and mirrors to achieve it because they know people won't buy it otherwise, you know, that's just the traditional fantasy side of things. And then you think about politics. It's gotten to the point where I kind of cringe whenever people try to talk about real politics because they take a quote from Game of Thrones. They can't really. It's sort of like Game of Thrones has been baked so much into the consciousness of how you think about things politically that when you want to talk about the real world, you often reach for this. On some level, that
It's
makes me
something that's
cringe,
true.
but on
Yeah,
another level, it's really great.
I'm with
You
you
know,
on that.
so
It's one of
it's
those things
yeah,
that the true kind of not I like you. I don't like to use the word franchise because when we're talking about literary works like this, it always seems a bit like diminishing. But the series and works and worlds that are being built here. I mean, you know, be it Star Wars, be it Game of Thrones, or the Rings, whatever it is. When they reach a certain point of like textured depth that people can engage with it on so many levels. I mean, politically, philosophically. That they can, and particularly when they're young as well, if they're reaching
yeah,
out to these kind of works as being a kind of stepping on point to the more complex aspects of life growing up, they really can provide a lens to how they see the world. And then obviously that by that nature they use that as a kind of what's the word, Rosetta Stone kind of thing in terms of how they're
Yeah,
thinking, translating things in real life. They'll think, oh, prime minister, president, thinking in terms of like the seat of power and power behind the throne, all that stuff. That they use that, and it helps them kind of understand more complex ideas moving forward. I think there's a lot of
sure.
power to that, and I agree with you. When people take it too far, it can be a bit cringy. But
There's
I think
also
it speaks
there-
to the strength of the fiction behind it. The fact that it does feel so
yeah.
real and so true, that people can take these ideas and play with them in the real space. Something
The
to be
other
admired.
issue is just it is, and there's some the other thing. The only reason why I sometimes cringe is I don't know what the word is. There's probably like some philosopher, professor, scholar somewhere who's like named this effect.
Mm.
But my issue with it is, and we've talked about this before. Like when we talked about Star Wars, we'll pivot into that for just one brief instance. When you're talking about something like, and to me, Star Wars is mostly about the expanded universe. We're both odd in that way, like it's not purely about like the films themselves, if anyone's watching this out of context. But so I have a very different relationship with Star Wars than maybe your average person or your casual fan there. But if you want to take the example of like what goes on in the events of Episode 3, and you have everybody kind of knows, when Chancellor Palpatine becomes emperor, and he has his big speech, and they have the "This is how liberty dies" and thunderous applause and all that, right? Everyone knows that. The weakness of it is whether you can agree on who's being represented in the analogy. If your picture of in the real world, if you're gonna cast somebody, you know, as Palpatine, like, are you choosing
The right face
somebody?
for the job.
Are you choosing the right person? Like, like if
Appreciate
do
and
you
understand the message
perhaps,
that was intended there, even in a
yeah,
non-allegorical sense,
yeah,
because a lot of people and writers try to avoid allegory. I mean, Tolkien being the prime example of someone who
yes,
famously wanted to avoid that. But they have
hmm
a philosophy or a political perspective or a moral message in many cases behind what they're saying that a lot of people can very easily understand. Um, because it's not just, even though it's not allegorical, it's not specifically one thing. It can mold to the
yeah,
viewer, to the reader. It's supposed to be something that you
yeah,
can interpret your own way, and it's not like all of these answers are it's one right, one wrong, etc. But there are a lot of often cases where people will take the message and spin it so that it fits other roles and fits other faces, and that can be extremely damaging and extremely
yeah,
harmful. And I think to none more so than the original creators. I think they would be shocked and appalled by some of the people who are using some of these ideas as masks in the
sure,
modern world in the way that they are
for
at the
sure.
moment. Um,
And that's the reason I say that only to say that, Game of Thrones to me is not, when I say that it's full of deep ideas, I hope I don't come across as saying, see, Tyrion was really talking about President so and so or Senator
yeah,
blah. Like when he said this, like there are times where things can sadly appear that one to one, but that's really not how I think most people should be going through things. It's more he's told a story that's so incredibly politically complex and rich and believable within itself. You don't need the outside world creeping in. You don't need to foist an alle- I'm very tongue tied today.
allegorical.
Allegorical, like reference upon like the fiction there. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the work is strong enough that it stands on its own. And if you have seen the show and been dismayed by how it ended up, or even if you loved it, we could talk about that
I
another
was going
time.
to
But
say,
even
yeah,
if you
big
loved it,
question mark on
yeah,
that one.
we could talk
Have you
about
met
a
anyone who loved the end of that show? I mean,
yeah.
even the
I mean,
contrarians, I feel, were on board with the hatred of that
I
one. But
felt
at least in my
I did
experience.
feel like I did feel that I was like really trying to give it as much as I could, but
Oh,
even
that's
I reached
true.
a point
Yes,
where
I remember that.
I
I
could
remember
not.
actually because
Like
I'd fallen off the wagon a few episodes before you because there was this, was it the second episode or fourth? I can't remember the ordering, but there was one. Yeah, it was one episode where this is fantastic, and I think we'd agreed that okay, this
it
is a
was the
really
last
good isolated
everyone
incident.
knows that. Everyone knows that as like the last episode that was good. And that's like the
Yeah,
one where like Jamie gives like
Brienne gets
Brienne
knighted
her
is
knighthood.
incredible. Yeah,
Like Podrick sings a song, everybody's getting ready to die together at Winterfell. Like,
Yeah,
that was that. Everyone knows that
that
that's like the
that gave
last
you a bit
good
more of a
episode.
glimmer of hope than it did me. I think because
Yes,
after that,
yeah, for
you were
sure.
you were riding a high that I was just not receiving. Because I completely agree that episode is phenomenal, but it's the only
No, but
bright
immediately
spark in a
after
in
that,
a in a yeah. I'd
immediately
fallen
after
off
that,
of
I
that
was done
one.
with it. Yeah, I mean, it didn't get better after that. Like it only got progressively worse. It found new ways to keep getting worse until it ended. And it was because I would rewatch the show all the time, and now I've very rarely seen it because when it ends that badly, you're just like,
It
I don't
really
want to
does
see that again.
tarnish it. Yeah,
You know?
and that was
Yeah,
the worst example I think I've ever seen of something that had fallen so from so high, so far and so fast.
hmm
It was because there was no one defending it that I knew of. Anyways,
yeah.
it wasn't something like Last Jedi with Star Wars where there are people who are desperately trying to make it that it wasn't as
I
terrible as it
never
was.
understood that. Yeah,
But they didn't even try with Game of Thrones. It was just that's bad.
yeah,
but
yeah.
like I
So
said, being
even
able to then
so
go
even
straight into the series of the book, and being like, okay, well
yeah,
let's put that aside and let's start reading from the beginning all over again. I really enjoyed diving into the actual books and seeing how he'd brought this world to life and made it worthy of the show that we got for the most part. You know, in those early
yeah,
years, it was really a joy to go through, and we've got a lot to say about it, I think. And we're going to be jumping straight
yes,
into a chapter discussion after this recording. Going to be going
yeah.
through
To
some
explain that, I
yeah.
just wanted to give a just to wrap all this up. If all you know is the show, you read the books. Whether you liked the show or not, read the books. If you're if you've heard that Martin just kills people for drama, not true. That's a common saying, not true at all. Just read them. It would be better that you just read it and see for yourself rather than me try to explain that one to you. A note about his prose that's often called into question. I've read a lot of fantasy since putting these down, or like since after our first reading of this. His prose is better than 99% of like mass, appeal fantasy. Like, I mean,
Mm.
I there's like you'd have to be like Rothfuss or somebody to I think have like better prose. And the problem with Rothfuss is he doesn't know how to structure a plot in a way that,
Or isn't
or
interested in
maybe
doing
he
it. Yeah,
knows.
he knows and he just is interested in doing it, maybe. But it's certainly the nature of the story for that one. But I'm with you.
Yeah,
I agree because Martin's prose is absolutely phenomenal. But I can understand
yeah,
the instinct behind some people saying it's not what he's best at because I don't think it is. He's incredible at it. But all of the like
yeah,
extreme strengths of the series are found elsewhere, and the prose is just very good on top of that. But you, like you said,
yeah.
you have to really reach for the absolute best of the other fantasy bunch to have people that are surpassing him even in the prose level. He's fantastic.
Yeah, and then another note about what we're doing, like what we're embarking on here is um if you don't know, or even if you do, as you may know if you've read the series before, it's told through a multi POV sort of structure, like limited perspective POV. So you have a rotating clutch of characters, and it's quite vast at this point, who tell the story, and we see the story through their eyes. So the thing about that is, the story takes a while to advance because you're seeing everything in sort of like kind of minute detail, and not in a in my opinion at least, not in a way that is tedious or boring or just plotting. There might be the occasional plot line that I think could have been more efficient, say, but we'll talk about that later. But the point is, the story inches along, through the perspective of many different eyes. And that means that each book is structured in a way where, say, the characters like John, Tyrion, Dany, Catelyn, they'll have multiple POV chapters in each book. And many people on the internet have made podcast after podcast after podcast where they say, we're going to look at every single one of these chapters. And I think like two people have ever like finished, like, because people fall off. It's not because the series is bad. It's people get
It's a lot of
married, they have a
work.
kid, they have to go to work, they have a life. They just never finish it. And so we're not setting ourselves up to do all that. We're not starting with the brand one and moving forward. And what we're doing is we're kind of just talking about what we want to talk about, and kind of like when we feel like doing it. And we have a lot to say. It also means that we can kind of sidestep the characters that maybe we don't have as much to say about. But we're not going to be, it's not our mission to go through the entire series. We're just trying to draw attention to things that we think are particularly well done or things that might be instructive. So,
Mm.
on the odd occasion where he did something that we might not think was brilliant, we can show you. why that is, and maybe you learn something or you can apply it to your own writing, what have you. And there's no real rhyme or reason to the order of things. We might look at something from book two today and come back and do book four next time or whatever. It's kind of just what we feel like
Kind of what
doing.
we're
So,
enjoying in the moment and what
um,
I'm feeling passionate about
yes.
discussing, really, because we want to
And
make this as enjoyable for ourselves as possible, not commit
yeah,
to a long slog that we're not feeling in the mood for at any given moment.
and this isn't the only fictional universe that we're going to be doing this with. We will do some of it with Star Wars, which is what we're most known for going for, or going through. We'll look at some books on this kind of level, where some of it is just pure analysis and appreciation of the text, and some of it is more just in-depth discussion of the lore, chapter by chapter. And then we'll be stepping into other mythos. We want to talk about the works of Joe Abercrombie, for example. We want to talk about the works of Patrick Rothfuss and other people. So just bear with us. And if you enjoy what we're doing, don't hesitate to let us know and maybe even leave a suggestion or two if you enjoy what we're about here. So that's about all I've got to say on this. Ready to
Yes,
get
yeah,
going, Callan?
yeah, absolutely. We hope you enjoy. Let us know if you have any suggestions in the comments below, and yeah, see you on the other side. I'm Callan, and I still don't have an outro.
Yeah, his watch has ended. Yeah, he died.
That'll be a
So
good one for this,
see you later,
actually. Yeah.
guys.
See you later.
Yeah.
Bye.